Good morning. My name is Jim Peoples, and I'm with GrassRoots Marketing. I'm in my second year of retirement from Lockheed Martin, and thank goodness my wife picked up my contract for the second year. So GrassRoots Marketing is her business. But one of the things I do is invite, talk about, think, innovate technology. And Mark asked me to find somebody who I thought would be really interesting. And I'm working on some space projects, so I asked my son who would be the best speaker that he could think of, and he's a lot smarter than I am. And he said J. Falker. Now, I always want to put an N in his name and make him a writer, but he's not a writer, he's a scientist. And I wanted to show you a video of what Jay does. Please.
One, drei, two, zwei, one.
So, that gives me goosebumps. I remember being a young man watching, I was halfway around the world involved in a conflict, serving my country, and I remember watching another man serving his country on the moon by stepping on the surface. We went to the moon. That's stunning. And so, I have this wonderful person here who has one of the neatest jobs in the world. So how did you get this job to go back?
Well, am I coming through? Thank you. By luck. I have a very interesting background where I started off in mainstream engineering, but I had an undergrad program called engineering science at Penn State that had core disciplines in mechanics, aeronautics, civil, human factors. So I got a good grounding in a number of engineering disciplines. And at the same time, I minored in economics, and in something there they had called Science, Technology, and Society. And that was about ethics and who we're working for when we build things. I had no plan whatsoever in doing this. These were things I was interested in, and math and physics were things I was good at. Didn't know how I would apply it yet. But I increasingly was moving towards transportation systems. And MIT had a master's program, has a master's program called Technology and Policy, which is any engineer or scientist who wants to work on a problem with a policy component can apply, and if you get into the technical discipline, they basically have you continue progress in that for a master's, and they teach you stuff about law, Sloan MBA courses, policy, so that you can work on the technical and the policy component of the problem at the same time. And in there, I specified transportation systems down to aerospace. And I started working on air and space traffic management. The FAA funded this. They have a commercial space transportation office, and they were interested in the proactive problem. Someday, we'll have more things flying in our airspace. They may look like the space shuttle. They may be space planes. We can't tell the difference until they leave the atmosphere. They may be expendable rockets like we have now, we just have more of them. The question was, how do we regulate these? Should they fly like normal rockets in special use airspace that we block off a large area for a long time? Can we integrate them right in with the planes? And this was a cool problem, and I started working on it, and almost every aspect of it was open, subject to interpretation. What will the vehicles look like? How close can they get to other vehicles? What does this mean for safety, efficiency, fairness to different markets? And I worked on this problem, and I did a lot of modeling of different vehicles and how they would fly around together. But I liked the problem so much, I applied for an interdisciplinary doctorate. And the Dean of Engineering created that for me. They call it Aerospace Engineering and Policy Analysis. So I got to work on this stuff for many more years. We just heard about education, and I'm a big fan of it. It was 11 years of higher education, figuring out how you attack a problem that is very big and complex and how you do something useful. This was engineers trying to make a difference. They said if you write your thesis and it sits on a shelf, you've done no good. So I worked on that, and all throughout my graduate years, I worked for different companies. Sometimes I was modeling air traffic and just working on delays, the problems of today. Sometimes I was working on technology portfolios, dreams of tomorrow. I came out, I was an FAA contractor for a little bit, and then had the opportunity to move into a new office NASA headquarters was creating in Washington, D.C., called Strategic Investments. This is in the budget office, and the theory was put some engineers in the budget office and see if we can connect our strategic plans. There's lots of visionary thinkers throughout NASA, people who have great ideas they've been working on, someday could change how we do everything. But how you connect ideas to progress is with dollars, as this audience knows very well. And what they wanted to say was, where do we really spend money? And at the end of the year, every year, a fact of our system is the annual budget process, which is very political. When the dust settles, where have we come out, and how does that vector align with where we were trying to go when we went in? Can we manage a little more strategically? So that is the door where they wanted to hire an odd dog like me who was a mix of engineering and policy and economics. And it was a really cool office with great people. But it was also, by complete luck, an incredible time to enter NASA. This was, we had lost Columbia, and then the president came in January 2004, and he made the announcement about the vision for space exploration. And we just saw a little movie about NASA's vision, about the way we would like to implement it. And in short, let me back up one step. When I was in that strategic investment office, and I wrote a little paper about things we could analyze and how it might help. I also stepped back, looked at the large picture, and I advised my boss that NASA was trying to serve too many masters, work on too many projects with too few resources. I didn't think that was the best way to make progress. Now, people say things like that all the time. This wasn't a
well, that's a no-fear position, that paper, right? Yeah.
I call him like I see him, and fortunately, the president came and solved this for us. He said, you're about exploration. Now, we have science, we have aeronautics, but there's going to be a whole new branch, a line of business created called exploration systems. Build the things to return to the moon. Because Apollo was an entire generation ago, we no longer have those systems. We don't even have all the people with the expertise anymore. In fact, I am the next generation. I was born a few months after Apollo 17. I'm 34, I have 2 kids of my own. No one has walked on the moon in my lifetime. So I'm all excited to go back. And I'm also a bridge generation. It's a great coincidence to be here today, which is the 30th anniversary of Star Wars. So I grew up on sci-fi, I play video games, I read science fiction by all the greats, some of whom we have in the audience today, which is just awesome to me. And I'm trying to figure out how you go from the ideas of tomorrow to the implementation of today.
So he and I have talked about this a little bit, so I'm going to kind of segue into this in a different way. There's a project that has an odd name called Constellation. And you came up with the idea of this, right?
Not me personally.
Yeah.
But that's NASA's response to the vision. The president said, actually, technically, the vision for space exploration we were given was return the shuttle to flight, because it had stood down after Columbia, finish the space station, then decommission the shuttle, build your new systems, continue to serve the space station, but go on to Moon, prepare to go to Mars and beyond. So that's what we're working towards. And the program, it's really an umbrella program for all the systems to do that, is called Constellation. And underneath those, things which are really programs in their own right, but we call projects, we have the Ares launch vehicle, the Ares 1 and the Ares 5, which sounds a lot like Apollo with the Saturn V. We have the Orion crew vehicle. We have the Lunar Surface Access Module, yet to receive a name, but the lander. Those are all the systems that Constellation is trying to manage. And I now work, just a year ago, I transferred from headquarters out to the Johnson Space Center to work in the program office. And I'm part of a team that does architecture design and trade studies. So something I just worked on last year was a water versus land study. Should our new capsule come back and splash down like Apollo did, or should it touch down on land like the Russian Soyuz? And what are the pros and cons here in terms of risk and cost? It was a fascinating study.
Well, I got the impression that you were in the team that came up with the idea, so they decided to give you an opportunity to prove how good you were, and they sent you down there and make you do it.
No, I don't. Let me simultaneously downplay and explain my importance. I'm not a senior executive. I'm not the level of all the participants in this conference. It's a great honor to be here. But for a blip, I was a very big player on the team of the transition. The president made the announcement. We got a new administrator, Mike Griffin, not identically, a little while later. And he said, we're going to lean this down and focus. We need the architecture defined now. What are the major systems? What are the major operations? Let's get this out the door while we have a window of opportunity, because political winds can blow. So they formed the Exploration Systems Architecture Study, a 60-day study. They formed a 12-man team to do 4 things. Design the crew vehicle for going back to the moon, design a launch vehicle or launch vehicles to do this, describe the rest of the systems and operations at the PowerPoint level, not designed for contract, but describe so everybody knows roughly what the game plan is and we can make movies like that one.
Right.
And fourth, completely redesign our technology, research and technology programs to support this new vision. I was asked to lead that 4th part of the ESAS team, the architecture study. So as every concept was developed, my team broke down system by system. What does this require? What do we have today? What does that mean for our research and technology programs? And help transition that.
Okay. Panning forward, how do you view, in your opinion, how do you view commercial space?
Hugely optimistically. Part of my research and my work for the FAA was about who else might fly and what those vehicles might do. And personally, I was disappointed that system after system that I analyzed didn't make it. However, some are on the verge, some are coming along now. The X Prize was one. That was great, and it was great for me personally. All my colleagues in NASA feel the same way. We're rooting for Elon. We're rooting for everybody else. In fact, a lot of the vision that you saw today, NASA can only do the first steps of. Another way that this entire plan was sold to the public, to Congress, is we will only go as we can afford to pay. We can't expect a big windfall. It's not realistic, and it's very easy for these systems to get much, much more expensive, and we're not going to afford them in my lifetime. What enables this for real is NASA taking practical steps and getting out there, commercial launch systems helping us, international partnerships helping us, and then we can move towards almost everything that was on that video.
If there was some international people who wanted to get involved, how would they do that? What would they do?
They're already started. What we are going to do on the moon, in fact, like a lot of things that we do, it's a very funny thing to be a systems engineer and learn you set requirements and then you design to meet them, and then go into Washington and learn that sometimes you have to have the concept and then you have to sell it and then you have to figure out how you're going to use it. We started on the transportation systems. That was the national position. We know we need new launch vehicles, we need a crew vehicle, we need a way up and down, and it should serve the station but be designed for the moon. So NASA I was on the architecture team to design how we would do that. Now the question is, what do we do on the moon? We didn't have the hubris to answer that on our own. We created a symposium. We invited space agencies from around the world to create something called the Global Exploration Strategy. And we invited all kinds of ideas. What would you like to do on the moon? What can mankind benefit from? And they generated nearly 200 objectives. And we've grouped those into 6 themes. And we're trying to design the systems. Now I'm part of an architecture team it's called the Lunar Architecture Study, or the Lunar Architecture Team, working on what our first steps will be and how it can be modular so that it can grow and accomplish more of these themes. But there are things like human civilization. Start with a sortie, grow it to an outpost, enable us to eventually have a permanent human presence on the moon, a colony that grows. Scientific knowledge. What research do we do there? Exploration preparation. How do we enable ourselves to move on to Mars and beyond? Let's see, there are 6 themes. Global partnership. We want to build off of what we've just done with the International Space Station. Most of space is too expensive, too difficult to do alone, and that's not the right way to do it anyway. We should learn to work with the other countries. We need it. We need each other. The space station was a perfect example to prove that. We had a problem with the shuttle. Unfortunately, the Russians had an alternative solution, and the space station is still flying. We'd like to build on that model for the moon. Economic development. We recognize that things like Star Wars stay in the movies unless there's a reason for people to put money down and a way to get money back. And the question is, how do we move into space so there's profit involved so that we can really get real dollars in development behind it? And finally, public outreach. How do we get to do things like show the movie and come and explain to you all what we're trying to do?
Okay, we have a few minutes left. I did want to ask one question as a taxpayer. What do I get out of it?
A whole lot. And I don't mean to say it as blithely as it came off. Partly, I believe there's actually a national desire to return to the moon and move on as a species, to evolve and actually have more places that we can live and move to. The answers are out in space. When we do something like discover something with the Hubble Space Telescope, the number of web hits are astronomical. As our rovers rove around Mars, there's a whole bunch of students there with them virtually, trying to imagine what life would be like there. It captures the imagination, and it is the direction for the future. There's no question about that. Ultimately, we move on or we perish. It's just a question of when. And when the shuttle went down, I was working in, part of my job then was with an office that was at headquarters for the space architect. And we had a different set of line of businesses then. But he asked the excellent question, is this too risky? What should we really do? What should we bite off here? What does the public want? What do the astronauts want? What does Congress think is our job? And we went through and we sort of got a whole bunch of op-ed pieces and articles and website reviews, and we just tried to understand what the general public felt about the risks and benefits. And it was great because it was overwhelmingly supportive. Of course exploration is risky. Of course we go. And so I think that part of the public really wants us to do this. Another part is you have to figure out where there's real economic benefit. There are resources out there, and the question is how do we get them and use them? At the moment, we're going to start in low Earth orbit like we're already beginning to, and people will move to things like orbital tours. We can see the beginning of space tourism already. There will be much more capability as soon as we can go to the moon or a larger space station more regularly. At the same time, NASA already produces and has for 3 decades good spin-off technologies. And I was in the exploration technology program for a while before the architecture study, working on exactly that. What should our labs be doing, and how do we best partner with things like industry, DOE labs? What can NASA work on and make a difference with the few dollars that we have to allocate? Because we also heard earlier in this conference that the days of federally supported research are ending. We can't do as much as we used to. We have to rely on business and work better with them. And I was part of that then, working on our research and technology and coordination. And I won't go into it here, but there are a bunch of NASA websites and publications about the spin-off technologies we've been producing. Part of our mandate all along was enable aerospace transportation and activities, but spin off your technologies to help people on the ground today.
Okay, cool. We have about 5 minutes left. I think this is a good idea to go back, just personally. What Jay's telling you are things that is his personal opinion so that you understand his enthusiasm. And it reminds me a lot of the video shot of the control room that I saw as a young man, seeing young men like Jay and others launch us and go on an exploration of the solar system. We are living on a single point failure, and it's the Earth. And if we could find another place to be, then we could preserve the genome, at least for some period of time. So let's bring up the house lights and see if we can get some questions from the audience.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you about, I'm Tom Krazit with CNET, by the way. I wanted to ask you about manned exploration versus unmanned exploration and how that goes over the next decade or so? I mean, obviously it's a lot more expensive, right, to send people into space and a lot more risky, but what's the benefit of actually sending people into space as opposed to just having it done by robots or other types of vehicles?
Thank you. It's a great question. I have actually heard many discussions on this, internal and external to NASA, and there's no clear answer on this. In fact, it's a funny thing that when I first started working in space policy analysis, I had two bosses, one of whom was entirely pro-robot and one was entirely pro-human, and they argued vehemently. Clearly, if you send robots instead of humans, you can send many more, at much lower cost, much lower risk, and frequently you can send to do things that humans can't. The flip side is also true, especially today. Also in this conference, we've seen better things about virtual presence and remote communication. Those are getting better, but they're not there yet. For almost all activities, why do people go anywhere in person? It's higher bandwidth. You want to see and touch and interact in person, and you can do things like science and exploration and business far better when you actually go there. It's also part of what Jim was just saying. The next step is being able to go beyond. We want to enable ourselves. We haven't started by sending humans. That would be very high cost and risk. We start by sending robots. So we had the Pathfinder mission. We have the Mars rovers still roving right now. And we're going to go to the moon before we go to Mars so we don't take on too much cost and risk before we're ready. But a partnership between the two, I think, is the right answer, and that's what we're trying to build now.
Would it be reasonable to expect that you could take all of us virtually to the moon when you go?
Oh, we will. That's absolutely part of, it's part of the engagement and the reason for going. But it doesn't change the fact that virtually isn't the same as really returning to the moon. We lost the capabilities we had during Apollo. We're going to rebuild them and gradually build on that so that humankind can permanently live and work other places.
Did that answer your question? Okay. Jay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to give you a minute or two back, Mark, so that you can get back on schedule.
Okay.
And thanks very much for coming, and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.